Welcome to today's webinar on the worker experience. I'm Haley Shenander of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. Before I turn it over to our speaker today, I have a few housekeeping items. Slides for this presentation and a copy of the video link will be emailed to all registered attendees next week. Eric will be entertaining questions at the end of his presentation, so if you have a question, please type it in the chat box on Zoom. We'd love to get your feedback at the end of this presentation as well, so please take a moment to fill out the brief 3-question survey that pops up in your Zoom window when you exit the webinar. And with that, I'll turn it over to Eric.
Thank you, Haley. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here today for this worker experience webinar, trying to get shine some light on the perspectives from the supply side of the labor market. Before I get started, I just want to put out this disclaimer that the views expressed here are mine only and not necessarily those of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis or the Federal Reserve System. And with that said, why are we doing this type of webinars and why are we doing this type of regional research? The most important job we have at the Minneapolis Fed is that of tracking the economy of the Federal Reserve's 9th district. How do we do that? Through analysis of public available data, direct contact with leaders in each of the states we cover. Some of you are here today, thank you very much. And of course, regional surveys. We execute those surveys to enrich our understanding of the regional economy. We focus on regional business conditions. Some of them are very specific to some sectors like manufacturing, agriculture, construction, etc. And in recent years, we have put a lot of effort to survey workers. And you may be asking, why workers? First, the Fed has a congressional mandate to pursue the stability of prices and maximum employment. The pursuit of those two pieces of the mandate contribute to the effective functioning of the economy. And making sure we improve our understanding of how the labor market and the economy overall are impacting workers is very important as the Fed pursues its goals. The intelligence we gather through this effort may help us better understand what is happening in the labor market overall. Publicly available data is very helpful, but hearing from workers directly adds context that we might otherwise miss. One of the biggest dilemmas in recent years, for example, has been employers' ability to hire the workers that they need. Job openings across the country reached some of their highest levels after the pandemic. And while that has changed, those levels have come down. Levels remain very high, well, slightly higher than in pre-pandemic times. Another statistic to look at is unemployment, which has been very low during the pandemic, after the pandemic as well. Less people, in other words, were out of work and actively looking for employment. Combining those two statistics, it is clear that the number of unemployed people per job opening reached some of its lowest levels of recent years after the pandemic. Now, this is a practical example of why it is important to understand some of the nuances behind workers' motivations and potential obstacles that they face as they try to navigate the labor market. To get more insights, we have been partnering with labor organizations, workforce development professionals, community organizations, as well as individual workers to hear about their firsthand experiences. This time, we partnered with WorkWell Minnesota and Community Action Partnership of Hennepin County. Just want to say special thanks to Julie Brecky and Kendra Krolik for their partnership and work on this effort. We appreciate you both. So before I get started, I just a few things that you will note is, for example, that flexibility was top of mind among many workers and job seekers. Workers faced a broad range of challenges as they look for changes in their employment. Wages are a top consideration when they decide to apply for a job or decide to accept employment. And despite inflation having come down from peak levels, many still felt that prices had continued to rise recently. I want to make it clear that the results you will see moving forward are based on a convenience sample, and they're not to be taken as being representative of the whole state or region. These are respondents that voluntarily took our survey. The results are not weighted, and again, they cannot be taken as this is what workers in the whole region or the state are saying. So of the slightly more than 500 respondents who took our survey, 414 specifically said they were either employed or without a job. This analysis will focus only on this last set of respondents, and among those without a job, specifically on those who said they would like to work. So who are these employed respondents we heard from, and what did we learn from them? Most were employed at a company versus either being, self-employed, navigating other employment situations. The majority were employed full-time. I think it's more somewhere around 64% were employed full-time, and very small minority were self-employed. The tenure at their job had some variation. About a quarter had just recently gotten their job. Almost 70% had actually only been at their job for less than 2 years. Now, that probably comes as no surprise given the opportunities for mobility that the tight labor market brought with it for many workers over the last few years. So maybe a lot of these workers just moved and became employed or changed jobs. Half of employed respondents who provided details on the industry they worked at were employed in 4 industries mainly: healthcare and social services, educational services, retail, trade, and transportation. Just a little note that I would like to make is healthcare and social assistance has actually also been one of the top sectors adding jobs in the state. So that doesn't surprise me either. We asked them to tell us, for example, how satisfied were they with some of these aspects that you see on the chart at their current job. And perhaps the most interesting thing to me here is that the share of individuals who said they were satisfied with work-life balance and flexibility, is at the top. As we saw earlier, a great share of survey participants have been employed for 2 years or less at their current job. The labor market being as tight as it was, it is possible that employers have acknowledged and adapted to the needs of workers, but we don't know that for certain. Especially because even when looking at those who had been at their job for longer, separating those two different groups, there was very little difference in what you see in front of you right now. So the way I interpret that is that workers value flexibility and will stick with the job that offers that flexibility they're looking for. On the opposite end of the chart, you see career advancement. What's the lowest aspect of the job these workers, were mostly satisfied with. Some commented, for example, that they saw no future opportunities for growth. They felt frustrated. They had reached, the highest point at their workplace, et cetera, et cetera. So as they consider changes in their employment situation, these employed workers fell mainly in 3 main groups: those who were looking for improvements at their place of employment, those who were looking for a different job, and those who were not looking for any changes. The shares between these 3 categories were very similar. About 12% were looking for a second job, and a small share was actually scaling back their employment to pursue other activities like school or start their own business. More than half of employed workers who were looking for a change in their employment situation, again, either at their current place of employment or elsewhere, felt that having more training or education will be helpful to reach their goals. Read another way, not having enough training or education, got in the way of them reaching the goals that they had set for themselves. Respondents to this question were allowed to select any of these, more than one of these options. So you will see that all of these percentages do not add to more than 100%. So continuing to read these as potential obstacles, housing was second with almost 40% of employed workers telling us that having access to affordable housing will help them get a job, while a quarter did not consider they had enough time to job hunt. They were probably very busy with their current activities, including the work they had. What will stop employed job seekers from applying for a job or accepting a job? When browsing through these job postings or even having a job offer in front of them, these workers will hesitate to apply or accept the offer, mainly if that job did not pay enough to meet their needs. I think, that may be a little surprise to all of you here today, because as we move through the labor market, we ideally will want to probably make more money than we did before. Second highest, schedule flexibility. Again, that kind of ties to the last point that was made, followed by feeling like requirements in a job posting may be too high for their experience or skill level. Also kind of tied to that need for additional education or the perception that having access to additional education or training will be helpful as they look for a job. This resonates with, again, most of that. A very small share, will not take a job if some benefits were not available. So, I think that priorities are very clear about what they're looking for in that job. What should that job offer them for them to take that job? So that was what employed respondents shared with us. The following slides are going to focus on that second share of respondents, those who told us that they were without a job, but wanted one. So now you'll notice here that the industry distribution of these workers' last place of employment is spread across a wider variety of industries compared to employed workers who were mostly concentrated in 4 industries. Again, at the top, healthcare and social services with about 10%. Now, for context and just to kind of compare that to that of employed workers, this is a much smaller share than those respondents who were employed, who worked in the healthcare and social assistance. So this is where they last worked before they became unemployed. The majority of those who were without a job and who would like to have one had lost their job. They did not decide to leave their job. They just were let go or so on. A very small share, 7%, had voluntarily left their job. The rest had different personal situations that kept them out of work. Some people were retired or students. Now, wanting a job and actively looking for a job is not the same. Technically, to be considered unemployed, an individual must be actively looking for a job. Almost 80% of respondents who wanted a job fell in that category. Another 4% wanted a job but was not actively looking for employment. Economists refer to this group of people that ideally will want to have a job, but they're not actively out there looking for a job as marginally attached. So it's a small share of respondents in that category that we heard from. That doesn't mean that again, this is not a representative sample. So some of the themes that emerged from people who provided a reason why they were unable to look for a job. We did not have a specific question to ask them what was keeping them, from looking for a job, but we did allow for some comments and some of the themes that emerged from that small percent of individuals that were marginally attached, where that, because they had to take care of their children, because they had decided to return to school, some had health issues, or some kind of disability that prevented them from joining the labor market. Again, these are just comments, and I will encourage you to take them as such. In the question of what will help unemployed job seekers reach their goals, the distribution is similar to that of employed job seekers, but there are some notable differences that I want to point at. Being able to pursue training or education is also at the top of the list. But the difference between that and the rest of the obstacles is more prominent among those without a job. In other words, being able to pursue training or education is the number one obstacle by a larger margin for unemployed respondents. Another notable difference that I will point at is that transportation ranks higher for unemployed job seekers, and having more time to look for jobs is less of an issue. Now, this next chart is very, very similar than that of employed respondents, in terms of what will stop them from either applying for a job or accepting a job offer. The share of unemployed respondents who will be deterred from applying for or accepting a job because the pay is too low, or because they failed, their qualifications were not high enough, it edges slightly higher compared to um, those employed respondents that I showed earlier, but the pattern is pretty much the same. The one last thing that I want to talk about today is, the financial situation of some of these workers. I would just say that decisions regarding employment are often tied to the financial needs of workers. There is a reason why pay is always at the top of things that workers prioritize in a job. And again, the following slides include, I will actually point out that the following slides brings all those employed and unemployed respondents together. Like most of our questions in terms of our surveys, those that voluntarily respond to these set of questions is what is reflected here. Now, more money is always helpful. It's kind of been a theme throughout this presentation, right? But how much more money will help survey takers meet their needs? That's one thing that we were curious about. Now, I will admit that this chart is a bit of a messy chart, and I won't spend much time here. But I will just point that the majority of respondents who answered the question asking about their financial conditions said that they made between 16 and 25 an hour. Perhaps the biggest takeaway is that many of them will be better off jumping to the next wage bracket. For instance, among those making between 16 and 20 an hour, the largest share of respondents will be happy if they just went, jump to the next wage bracket between 21 and 25. You can kind of see that pattern manifested too in other brackets. A fifth of respondents to the financial situation questions, had no savings to depend on. If they had to, if they found themselves without a job, or if they, all of a sudden had an emergency to cover, only about a fifth will be able to cover expenses for more than 6 months. An extended period of time, again, of unemployment or emergency could be very detrimental for the majority of respondents to the survey. So that, some comments, show a little bit of stress in terms of having the ability to cover some unexpected expenses. Speaking about stress, the top expense that kept respondents on their toes, was rent. Obviously, if you don't have a roof over your head, that is a major concern. Being able to buy food and having to repair their vehicle should it break also was, close to the top. Now, a lot of progress has been made in bringing down inflation from its 2022 peak. It has continued its path towards 2%, which is all great news. But our respondents still feel prices are rising. So most prominently in food, these two categories right here. At the very top, they have experienced price increases in prepared food, whether that is takeout or dining out, either at fast food places or full service restaurants. And next, groceries are very close to the top. Now, the intensity at which respondents felt prices were rising, however, is lower than in similar surveys we have executed. Now, those surveys are not comparable, but it's one thing I noted when I was looking back, that respondents still feel prices are going up. Prices are always going up and down, but again, they're not feeling like they're going up in such intensity, just marked here by this green line. I think at the peak of inflation, these bars were closer to that 80% line. So just to kind of summarize what we just heard, whether employed or not, flexibility is prominently in the minds of job seekers. A good share of your job seekers, as you saw, will benefit from additional education or training to reach their occupational goals. Schedule flexibility is the number one thing the majority of employed respondents, was satisfied with. Again, a little bit of a surprise for me. Not many have savings to cover long periods of unemployment or unexpected expenses. And I will add, inflation continues to be a concern for a lot of workers. So with that, I'll leave this last slide up for a little bit. Please do feel free to reach out in any of these ways. Happy to engage more of you in this work, those of you that may be interested. And with that, I'll hand it over to Haley for any questions that she might see.
Yes, so Eric does have some time for questions. If you have questions, please type them in the Zoom chat box. So let's start with this one. Someone was wondering, do you know if any of those employed workers had multiple jobs?
Some of those workers, yes, they did. If I, remember correctly, it was somewhere between 18 and 20%. I did not dive into that in this presentation, but yes, certainly some people were, held more than one job. And in the comments, again, taken as comments only, some will say that they had to recently find a job because they wanted to meet um, their more expensive needs.
Great. Someone else was also wondering, do you know how long people have been out of a job?
Some of these people had been out of the job between, it varied, but it was, some of them about 12 months, I think it was the majority. So there wasn't a huge gap between employments.
And someone in the chat was asking, do you have demographics of the sample, specifically age, race, and location?
We do, again, for this type of webinars, we don't dive into that, but yes, we do. We collect some of that information, and for us to better understand what is happening in some populations. Again, I guess I will go back to say that we have been doing this work for the last few years. We're still working on our methodology and figuring out how we can best learn about what those impacts are for certain populations because of the sample. It's good to collect that information, but I don't want to put it out there and say X population is feeling this way about it versus this other population is not. I think that in time we're hoping to use that.
Right. Someone else asked, 30% indicated they were seeking better working conditions. Do you have any insight on what conditions are most important to these respondents?
Again, the flexibility, right? I think that goes back to they were seeking better conditions at work, and some of that, the following question was, what is it that you're seeking to improve, right? I think it is that flexibility they want. Also, you saw that a lot of people want to feel like they have the opportunity to grow at work. So I think they see that as flexibility. More on the commentary side, we will hear, they wanted better leadership, right, within work, being given more specific directions about what their work was. But again, those are commentaries, isolated commentaries that I will not dare to say this is what people are feeling.
Great. It looks like that's our last question for today. So thank you everyone for joining us. Please join us for our next virtual event, Regional Economic Conditions General Business, on Tuesday, August 20th. More information will be on our follow-up email to this event. And with that, I hope everyone has a great day.